In this video, I'm going to show you an extremely broken build in Update 2.0. Now this build is going to be focusing around mainly crit damage and the use of throwable weapons. And during my testing, all of this was done on very hard difficulty. Now to quickly start off this video, these are the knives that I used in my testing, just so you can see what I specifically used. Alright, now let's jump over to the character. So here, of course, I'm a level 50 save with level 50 street crit. But as you can see with this build that I have done, I have left myself with 20 attribute points as well as 8 perk points. Now I have an extra 4 perk points because I have upgraded my skills, as you can see here, 4 perk points. So you can expect to have 20 attribute points as well as 4 perk points left over after doing this build. On top of that, because I have so many left over, that means that you can actually do this build at around level 30. So to start off with, of course, body is at 4, but I did put a little bit into body. So we went with Painkiller, which unlocks slow health regen in combat. And then we went with Comeback Kid, which is plus 1% health regen rate for each percent of health missing. On top of that, we went with Speed Junkie for 60% health regen rate while sprinting, and we went with Army of 1, which is plus 10 health regen rate for each nearby enemy. And that is all that I went for with body. Now we'll jump over here to reflexes. I did put it into level 4 and decided to get slippery, which the faster you move, the more difficult for enemies to shoot you. These effects increase when dashing, dodging, sliding, sprinting, and vaulting. And then the next skill tree, which is cool. Now, of course, I have maxed out Cool to level 20, and these are the perks that I have unlocked in Cool. And of course, to start off with, I went with Feline Footwork and Ninjutsu, mainly because these are supporting perks that are required to get style over substance. Now, I went with the Optical Camo perks that you can find here, as I plan on running Optical Camo as well, that I can use for stealth before initiating combat. Now, I'll go back down to over here. I have Killer Instinct, which is 25 damage with knives, axes, and silence guns outside of combat, which will increase the damage done to the first enemy before you enter combat. Now second up, I went with Quick Getaway, which is increased movement speed after neutralizing an enemy while undetected, and I went with Gag Order, which is landing an attack on an enemy right after they detect you will delay detection from other nearby enemies. And next up, these are the main perks that are required for this build. To start off with, I have Scorpion Sting, which is minus 15% recovery time for throwable weapons at level 1. And then level 2 is crit hits, headshots, and hits to weak spots with throwable weapons apply poison for 5 seconds. Now for the supporting perks, I of course got all, which are just going to increase my crit hits, as well as increase the damage done by poison, and allow me to poison mechs, robots, drones, and turrets. Now next up, we went with Juggler. Now this is going to decrease our recovery time for these throwable weapons, allowing you to get your weapons back a lot faster, as well as increasing headshot and weak spot damage. And of course, for level 3, a instant cooldown reset for all throwable weapons after neutralizing an enemy with a throwable weapon via headshot, crit hit, or by poison. And of course, we went with all 4 supporting perks for this and the finishers, which when performing will restore 25% health. And then last but not least is of course style over substance. Now this guarantees crit hits with throwable weapons when crouch sprinting, sliding, dodging, or dashing, as well as no movement speed penalty when aiming a throwable weapon. And next up is technical ability, which is one of the main focuses for this build. As you can see, I have maxed it out at level 20, and I have put quite a few perks into it, with the main needs for this, in my opinion, being Edge Runner, all the way here at the top, and Ticking Time Bomb. Now these two paired together when running a Sandevistan is going to be extremely crucial. So to start off with, I'll start with down here. I went with Glutton for War, and this is just to increase the recharge of health items. Now I went with the supporting perk Transfusion, which is plus 30% health for the final charge for your health item. Now next up, I went with Health Freak. Now this just increases the recharge speed for health items as well as grenades, and increases a health item charge when you get it to level 2. On top of that, you do get a 150% recharge rate for health items outside of combat. For the supporting perk, I went with Borrowed Time, which is 100% instant charge of a health item after neutralizing an enemy if you are below 25% health and have no charges remaining. Now this is a great thing because I find that I'm using a lot of healing, or I find myself making mistakes, and this kind of saves me. Now the next supporting perk is Field Medic, which is just faster use for healing items while in combat. And then next up is Pyromania. Now I just mainly got this perk to unlock Ticking Time Bomb, as it is a required perk to unlock Ticking Time Bomb. But on the screen right now you can see the stats for this. Now next up over here, I went with all things cyber and of course License to Chrome. Now these are just going to increase your stat modifiers as well as decrease your capacity cost for Cyberware. Now over here for a supporting perk, I went with -5 incoming damage if all integumentary system and skeleton Cyberware slots are filled. Now this is great because it's going to remove, as I said, -5% incoming damage, which on very hard, any little bit of reduced incoming damage is going to be a major help. Now, of course, here for another supporting perk, I went with Resonance Punk, which is +4 Cyberware capacity for each attribute at 9 or higher. And I went with Driver Update, which makes it so all Cyberware will gain an additional stat modifier. Now next up for License to Chrome, the supporting perks that I went with is Cyborg, which is 15% reduced cooldown for all Cyberware if all available Cyberware slots are filled. Now on top of that, I went with Extended Warranty, which is 15% duration for all Cyberware effects. And then of course, as I said, I went with Edge Runner, and I went with Ticking Time Bomb. The Ticking Time Bomb being for the EMP, as well as the -50% incoming damage while charging the EMP. Now on top of that, we will have Fury State from Edge Runner and using the Sandevistan, which is going to help us stay alive on very hard. Not only that, Edge Runner will increase our damage by 10%, our crit chance by 30, and our crit damage by 50, which is going to be just unbelievably good, especially using these knives, and for very hard. Now, on top of that, let's get into Cyberware. For Cyberware, I'll start up with operating system. I went with the Dynalar Sandevistan, and of course, I did upgrade it to Tier 5++. Now, you don't need to upgrade any of these to Tier 5+ or ++, but I highly recommend it, which will slow time by 50%, increase crit damage, and crit chance by 15%. Now, those are very crucial, and that's why I decided to go with the Sandevistan, is just to mainly increase those, and not to mention slow time, which will make it a lot easier to land shots with throwable weapons. And the next up for hands, I went with Handle Wrap, and this I did upgrade to Tier 5++, as I did find it was increasing the crit chance by quite a bit. I'll put on the screen right now what the stock crit chance is for Handle Wrap. On top of that, when it is fully upgraded, it will provide a +27% crit chance with throwable weapons for 6 seconds. On top of that, it is also cool attuned, which will increase headshot and weak spot damage by 0.2% per attribute point spent on cool. Now, of course, since we have maxed out cool, we are getting a +4%. And next up is circulatory system. So for circulatory system, I went with Second Heart and Biomonitor. So for Second Heart, I decided to go with this just because of the fact that it gives me a second life. And then next up, I went with Biomonitor, which automatically heals you with your equipped health item when your health drops below 35%. And on top of that, it does have a +15% health item effectiveness. Now next up for legs, I went with Reinforced Tendons. Now the reason I mainly went with this is for double jump, but I did also realize that it is reflexes attuned. So it will gain 0.1% crit chance per attribute point spent on the reflex category for your character, which will add up to a total of 0.4%. But since I put very little into reflexes, as you can see, it is only at 4. If you were to upgrade reflexes and get either perks like dash, or to go into Slaughterhouse over here for the melee and bullet deflection, on top of that to have the finisher for melee weapons, you could do that, and that would also increase your crit chance by a ton. But I found that this build is perfectly overpowered, even for very hard as it is. But if you feel like upgrading this, I highly recommend doing so if you're going to put perks into reflex. Now for next up, let's go to frontal cortex. So for frontal cortex, I went with Newton module, and upgraded it to tier 5++. Now what this Cyberware will do is do minus 1.35% cooldown instantly for all Cyberware after neutralizing an enemy. It will also gain 0.5 armor per attribute point spent on technical. Now, of course, I have a +10 because we have maxed out the technical ability. And then next up is the skeleton tab. For skeleton Cyberware, I went with spring joints, kinetic frame, and epimorphic skeleton. Now to start off with spring joints, I did decide to leave this at tier 5, and I'm showing you why right now. When I upgrade spring joints, for some reason, it actually gets worse. A quick little editor's note here. I did quickly do the math and find out that I am correct about this. So 19% of 34 is going to actually be 6.46. Now, if you do 16% of 40, you are going to actually only get 6.4. So technically it is better to leave it at tier 5. And if I have made a mistake here, please feel free to comment down below and correct me. And that is why I have left some at tier 5 and some are tier 5++. Now next up is kinetic frame. Yet again, I left it at tier 5 and it is plus 18% mitigation chance when stamina is above 85%. On top of that, it will increase crit chance per attribute point spent on reflexes by 0.1%. Now this, yet again, if you were to put points into reflexes, you could increase both kinetic frame as well as reinforced tendons and their crit chance, making throwable weapons even more powerful than they already are with this build. And now for the last skeleton Cyberware being epimorphic skeleton, which is just going to increase plus 15% of our max health, as well as 0.5 health per attribute point spent on body. And as I only spent 1 attribute point on body, this is very low, but I still found it to be a nice little boost as it gives me a ton of armor. And now for the next set of Cyberware being nervous system. Now for this, I only went with one Cyberware, and it is Stabber. So Stabber will provide us with plus 20% crit chance with blades and throwable weapons. On top of that, it is reflex attuned, which will give us 0.1% crit chance per attribute point. Now, yet again, if I were to put a whole bunch of perks into reflexes, this is where this build could get even more overpowered than it already is. And for the last set of Cyberware being the integumentary system, I went with optical camo just to add a little bit of stealth to this build. I went with shock and awe and decided to go with proxy shield. Now of course, optical camo with this tier 5 version will give us minus 90% visibility to enemies for 7 seconds. And the next Cyberware that I went with is shock and awe. So now what this is going to do is whenever you take damage, you have a 10% chance to release a large electroshock that deals 500 damage to nearby enemies. And now in my playing, when I am fighting a massive group of enemies and taking a lot of damage, I found that this thing was going off nearly constantly. And not to mention with the fact that I've paired that up with the Edge Runner perk as well as the ticking time bomb, whenever I use my Sandevistan, I will activate the ticking time bomb perk, which charges a powerful EMP that hits nearby enemies. Now having those paired together with the shock and awe Cyberware was just constantly doing passive damage to enemies around me. And then the last piece of Cyberware for this video is proxy shield. Now what this will do is the closer an attacking enemy is, the less damage they deal to you. Now this on tier 5 is minus 20% incoming damage at 3 meters. And damage reduced tapers off to 0 at about 6 meters. And with using throwing knives, which this build is mainly focused on, proxy shield was great to have as I find myself in constant close combat using the throwing knives. And all the gameplay you've been watching has been recorded on very hard difficulty. And not to mention, if you want to, you can even take this build even further by fully upgrading your reflexes for your character, which will increase the crit chance for both your reinforced tendons as well as the kinetic frame Cyberware. Now if you max out your reflex skill for your character while having both the kinetic frame and reinforced tendons, will add up to a total of 4% crit chance increase for just having reflexes at level 20. So yeah, that is my high crit throwing knife build for Update 2.0 and Cyberpunk 2077. If you give this build a try, comment that down below, as well as any things that you either think I should have changed or missed while creating this build. On top of that, feel free to comment down your own builds in the comment section down below to help others in the community, as well as feel free to tweak and edit this build however you see fit. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.